The poet William Wordsworth, in his poem My Heart Leaps Up, writes, "The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety." The child is father to the man. I think Michael Apted probably had that in mind when he was working on the film 7 Up in the early 60s. The point of the short film for the BBC was to talk to children 7, 8, 9, 7 Up essentially, and kind of do a tomorrow's leaders today type of documentary. You talk to the kids, kind of like a Art Linklater kind of thing, and see what the kids thought about things that were going on in the world. And Apted worked on that film and had the idea 7 years later to come back and revisit those kids. And he's done that every 7 years since, until his death in 2021. He filmed 21 Up, 28 Up, 35 Up, 42 Up, 49 Up, etc. He revisits the same people every 7 years. And to watch the films together, back to back, is a very profound experience, because you're essentially seeing these people's lives, the entire course of their lives, on the screen. In the very first movie, 7 Up, their children. The most recent one, I think, was 63 Up, came out in 2019. And then, of course, as I say, Apted passed away 2 years later. I have no doubt that his family will continue the project until there's no one left. But when you watch the first film, if you've seen them all, if you go back and rewatch them, Wordsworth's phrase comes back and echoes in your brain: the child is father to the man. You can see, knowing what we know about these people's lives, you can see the germ of that in things they say as children. And you can see the germ of the man, for example, this man would become. You can see that germ in the face of the boy. All of this is by way of prologue for why I find it fascinating to take the kings and queens of Comicsgate and, where possible, dig up, hunt down, and find their early works, if not their earliest works. And in the case of John Malin, that work is Digital Webbing Presents #1, an anthology book that John did the story The Infection, written by L.A. Gould Jr., lettered by Ed Dukeshire. And what I find, I don't know how to talk about art. It's not my field. I was a lit major that went into law. So when I talk about art, I talk about it as a layman. But what I find fascinating overall when looking at the early art of creators, and particularly fascinating in the infection, is I recognize the line work. And I don't know if line work is the word I'm looking for, so if I'm saying it poorly, read around me. But I recognize the faces as faces that would be drawn by John Malin. I recognize the action sequences and the poses as body shapes that I've seen in later Malin work. So I view that as I can see the birth of his line work in the infection. It's a short story, 1, 2, 5 pages. And as with all short stories, it's challenging because a short story is it? Yep, 5 pages. A short story is a lot more challenging than a longer story because you have to get in and get out. You have to set up everybody, set up the idea, set up the premise, hit the punch, and then go. To that end, and along those lines, it's a perfectly serviceable little science fiction story. What makes it special is the archaeological work that you get to do here by seeing the nascent penmanship of Malin aborn. So, if you're into this kind of thing, i.e. hunting down and viewing the birth of an artist, everything goes back to Joyce. Joyce wrote the portrait of the artist as a young man. If you're interested in seeing the birth of the artist as a young man, I would recommend Digital Webbing Presents #1. I found it on eBay. As I say, it's like going back and seeing not the artist himself born, but the artist born as an artist. And even as I say that, I'm aware that the artist isn't born on the page of his first published work. The artist is born on the hundreds of thousands of doodles and scribblings and things that he did for himself. But in terms of the published birth of the artist as an artist, I found this to be a fascinating experiment and an insight into the arc of the talent of the coach himself, John Malin. This has been Tom Tuttle.